This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And so I want to give a special thank you to Oz Penguin, who just made a very generous contribution to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 436 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is James Hibbard. He's an editor-at-large for Entertainment Weekly, and was previously the TV editor at The Hollywood Reporter. And we'll be speaking with him today about his new book, Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, about the making of the HBO series Game of Thrones. The book draws on 8 set visits and over 50 new interviews, as well as hundreds of articles that James wrote about Game of Thrones during its 8-year run. And now here's our interview with James Hibbard. All right, so we're here with James Hibbard. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, David.
So how big of a fantasy and science fiction fan were you before Game of Thrones?
I've always kind of loved science fiction. I was less of a fantasy fan, though I did read the Lord of the Rings books as a kid. And I also loved the Chronicles of Amber series, which for some reason still hasn't been made adapted. And that's one that, as coincidentally, George R. R. Martin loves as well, and you know, he was good friends with Roger Zalansky, and I also really particularly loved Dune, which is sort of both sci-fi and fantasy, and I think in recently rereading that, it's one of those books that you're like, this is also, along with Lord of the Rings, what seems to be a clear influence on George. If you look at the hero's main storyline, it's almost like a male version of Daenerys Targaryen's storyline throughout the series.
Yeah, well, and certainly the families going into the dangerous situation, and the father being killed, and the kids sort of being scattered and hunted and everything. Totally. Right.
And then the hero has to learn to master meets up with this desert tribe and then becomes the leader, and then ends up conquering a creature that's used to come back and reclaim the family's birthright. So it's an interesting comparison. You go through it like that.
Yeah, that's so cool. You mentioned Amber too. That's my favorite series, and
no way, really? I've never, I haven't read those since I was a kid, but I love them.
Yeah, no, I've read, Guns of Avalon, I think I've read 40 or 50 times.
Wow.
And, I've read, there's a couple that I'm not so fond of, Courts of Chaos or Prince of Chaos. But a lot of them I've read, like 10, 15, 20 times or more. So yeah, I just love those books so much. So, but you haven't read them since you were how old did you say?
I was probably a teenager, and I think a big, I think my favorite, because I hadn't really thought of this either. I was also a huge fan of all the C.S. Lewis books, and also a huge fan of Ray Bradbury. I devoured everything that I could get my hands on from Bradbury, and he was one of those authors that's really tough to adapt, but his writing is so beautiful and brilliant. And you read a short story like A Sound of Thunder, and just think that this guy wrote this on a typewriter at the UCLA library. That was a pay-per-use typewriter, and he's putting in like a dime for 20 minutes, and you don't have all these tools that we have on a laptop to revise and rewrite and cut and paste, and he's just pounding it out, and then he creates something that's brilliant. He was just fantastic.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with you that Amber was a big influence on Song of Ice and Fire. I've always seen Jaime Lannister as a very sort of Corwin-esque
Oh
character.
wow, yeah. Yeah, and they even had like each character had their own colors too, like the houses of in Thrones had their own colors.
Yeah, and there's little references to it too. I don't know if you ever know, if you look through the like the houses, the list of characters at the end. One of the houses is House Rogers of Amberley, and the crest is, I forget, it's like a unicorn or something. It's something related to Amber.
Oh, I know. I never noticed that. That's an awesome bit of detail.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
then,
and it's funny. The Thrones producers did things like that too, because they added in a House Mason into the show, which was based on Craig Mazin, the producer, the one that famously told them that the original pilot was a total mess. And they made the sigil on it a coin, in order to imply that their friend was cheap. So that was kind of a dig on them. So that was like a private little joke that one of those little details that I didn't put in the book because it's a pretty niche thing, but yeah, it's interesting they both did that.
yeah. So then tell us about reading Game of Thrones for the first time. What was that like for you?
Well, for one thing, I couldn't believe that I had never heard of this before, and I literally spent a lot of it reading it in a park that I would go off and escape to north of Los Angeles, like under a tree, like Frodo, just like literally just like up against a tree in a shady park by myself on weekends when working at the Hollywood Reporter. And that was my favorite time of the week to escape the city and go up there and sit in this park and read these books. And I just remember thinking that, I remember thinking that this is absolutely impossible as a TV show. I remember thinking that there's no way that these guys could actually do this. And so, but if they could do it, it would be something that would change television. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before, and it broke so many of the tropes. So I figured either they would somehow pull this off and it would be this amazing hit show, or at least, if not a hit show, an extremely influential and impactful show, or they were going to fall flat on their face out of the gate. That was going to be some amazing, spectacular screw up. And as a reporter, either way, that's a good story. So, either way, I wanted to cover it.
Yeah. So this was like 2010 or so you were reading it?
Let's see. No, this would be like 2008, because I broke the news of the pilot in 2008 and then spoke to Dan David for a story. And they basically did, to me, the same pitch that they did to HBO, except a very abbreviated version. And so I left the phone call going, because and the thing is, I would write stories. Deal of the day stories are the nuts and bolts of the trade publication. So I would do stories about things being ordered or canceled or renewed every single day. Many stories per day, and then I would just go about my business. But talking to them on that call, they kind of sold me on it, like they sold HBO. So I was like, man, that does sound really cool. So that's what prompted me to go pick up the books.
Yeah. Because I had been really into it. I actually first started reading it in 96.
Oh, wow. You got there really early.
Yeah. Asimov's magazine published like the Daenerys chapters, or a bunch of them, as a novella called Blood of the Dragon. So I read that, and then I started reading the books a little bit later in 2001. And then by 2003, I had read all the books like 5 times, and I was spending like 4 hours a day on a Song of Ice and Fire message board and stuff like that. So,
oh, wow. Yeah. So yeah. So when I hit, I remember, I don't know what your favorite is among them, but I remember reading A Storm of Swords and just being flabbergasted at how good it was. I remember thinking, this is the most fun, and fun maybe might not be the right word, but this is the most fun I have ever had reading a book. And just the twists and turns and the way the characters developed in that book, the combination of intimate and epic, which is what makes Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones so good. I thought it was just spectacular, achievement in writing.
Yeah, I sort of go back and forth on whether I think the first one or the third one is the best. I mean, I think the third one has like the highest highs, but then I feel it's also a little bit too padded. Whereas the first book is just like, there's no,
super tight.
Yeah. So that's kind of the trade off between those two books. But Storm of Swords is just absolutely phenomenal. Like just and especially reading your book, I was just reminded of how many amazing things there are, that the show drew from that one book. And it's just like, it's been a long, I haven't read the books for, since Dance with Dragons came out, so for like 10 years almost. So it was reminding me like, oh yeah, wow, there's so much good stuff in that book.
Yeah, it's actually been quite a while since I've read the books, and so one of the things I'm looking forward to is sort of diving back in again, probably before Winds of Winter comes out, presumably next year.
Yeah, you never know. It was actually funny because I just in preparation for this, I went back and listened to our last discussion of Game of Thrones, which is actually was in 2005, I guess. Or no, sorry, it was in 2015. Because my friends and I all swore a pact that we weren't gonna watch the show after that point. We were gonna try to avoid spoilers and wait for the next book to come out.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That's that. So how long did that last?
I haven't watched the show past season 4.
You haven't watched the show past season 4,
right? And so at that time we were saying like, oh, if we can just hold out, if we can just dodge spoilers for 9 months or a year, by that point maybe the next book will come out, and then we'll have at least avoided spoilers for that book. Little did we know. But yeah, so I just saw that your book came out, and I felt like I've been spoiled on everything at this point. I mean, I didn't.
Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, my book is almost certainly not the best way to be spoiled on seasons 5 through 8.
Well, see, I actually disagree. I think because I'm much more of a book person than a TV person, and so I was kind of like, well, if I read this, it's like, at least I'm getting it from a book. I have the experience of reading, finding out these twists from a book rather than from a TV show. So I actually loved it. I thought it was at least for me, it was the perfect way to, sort of dive back into the world.
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine, and not to stay too long in this, but I'm trying to imagine finishing season 4 and then just going, okay, that's it. Because that season's so great too. A lot of people, think that is the best season of Thrones, and then just having the sort of willpower and discipline to no, I am not going to watch anymore until the books come out. So that's pretty impressive. Well,
yeah. So I mean, the thing was, I watched up to I might have watched a little bit. I forget exactly when it was of season 5, but the point where Barristan Selmy dies, I was like, I know what. I found that pretty underwhelming. And so at that point I was kind of like, I can stop this. But really the part that took the willpower was not even so much that, was just that for years, I would be at parties or whatever, and people would start talking about Game of Thrones, and I'd have to say like, no spoilers. Then I'd have to leave the room, and
yes.
And that was the much more difficult part.
Yeah. So you're like me in that sense that you don't like, spoilers, which, coincidentally is what helped me in terms of getting access to the show. Because I was on the set for season 2. I found out about Jason Momoa coming back for a cameo as Khal Drogo, and the producers were like, very worried because it's, oh no, the reporter found that out. And at the time, and for many years, obviously, every reporter covering Game of Thrones was trying to figure out the next spoiler, trying to figure out what were going to be the differences between the books and the show. And personally, as a viewer, I don't like to know spoilers. I like my when like one of my favorite shows of the past 10 years, along with Game of Thrones, was Breaking Bad. One of my best friends works at EW. He covers Breaking Bad, and he'd always want to talk to me about things. I'd be like, no, do not tell me anything. I do not want to know anything. Don't you dare tell me anything about Breaking Bad. So when it came to my coverage, I was always like, well, how can I sort of tease what's going to happen and talk about the production process, without giving away anything that if I were reading the story, that I would be like, oh no, I wish I didn't know that, So, and I think that's something that, that the producers appreciated, and because that spoilers were so important to them in terms of keeping them out. So they're like, they can take criticism, but they don't, just don't, spoil it for other people.
So you think if other reporters had found out the Jason Momoa thing, they would have run with it?
I don't know. I wouldn't want to speculate what others would have done with it. But I think that just the fact that I wasn't sort of looking to spoil things. I was more looking to cover things like after they happen. Like for instance, the Jason Momoa thing, ideally what I would have probably wanted to do, and I don't remember what I actually ended up doing, is have an interview with Jason Momoa that ran the next day, or, about that cameo. To me, that would be the sort of cool thing to get, not to, prematurely tell people, oh, this is coming, and spoil it from ahead of time. So it's not that I wouldn't want to cover the spoilery things. I'd want to heavily cover the spoilery things, but I'd want to cover them after they happen and talk about, how that came about, and, what it was like on set and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I was watching the show, and I was actually reviewing season 2 for Wired, and I was really not very thrilled with season 2. And so a lot of my reviews were kind of snarky. Mm-hmm. And I would just wake up, I forget if it was Monday morning or Sunday morning or something, and there would just be like hundreds and hundreds of angry comments. And
do you read the comments?
Well, back then I did. Yeah. Where I was going with this was that, after doing this for, for the season or whatever, I had just gotten to the point where I no longer cared what anyone else's opinion was about anything. That's kind of continued to the present.
Right.
But what was that like? Did you have Did you run into that sort of real fan passion thing when you were covering the show?
Yeah, and it's funny because I go back and forth, because I like to think that I don't care, but I care. Because I like to think that I am like immune, and people just get mad about things sometimes, and it often doesn't have anything to do with you, or it might not even have anything to do with the show, and sometimes just people want to vent. You shouldn't take it personally, but at the same time, I tend to be a pretty sensitive guy, and so I try to not look, because then I end up getting upset. So I kind of go back and forth. I try and practice good self-health and not invest too much in that, but sometimes I do get there's a passage in there where I forget whether it's David or Dan, but one of them talks about the experience of reading a comment, and then you find yourself having an argument in your head with the person that wrote the comment, about here's why you're wrong to think that, and and you can never win that argument in your own head, and it basically takes over your mind. And for them, as busy as they were and as much responsibilities as they had, as many decisions that they had to do, they had to kind of disconnect from fandom, because otherwise they would be constantly distracted and constantly having to weigh all these other points of view, and having like these little internal battles when someone says something that you disagree with. And I do think that's interesting that they felt like they had to either be, especially you watch how showrunners interact with fans nowadays. Some are very interactive. They're like on Twitter, they're replying to things, they're going back and forth with people who criticize them, and then others disconnect completely. And so it's interesting to see that. And I don't, as part of my job, I have to be on Twitter and engage to some extent, but I often debate with myself about how much is the right amount.
Yeah. I really hope they never read any of my reviews. If they did, I apologize.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wrote recaps of every single episode of Game of Thrones, and I was made fun of every single episode of Game of Thrones. So I was pretty snarky myself, and I would frequently hit publish on something. I'm like, well, that's the last time I'm ever going back to the set, So, but and I also covered the various controversies with the show along the way. I do think one thing that I don't do is I don't tend to I don't tend to take cheap shots, I don't think, and I don't make assumptions about why somebody did something unless I know why they did something. It's, in other words, I don't go from, this was a bad decision to this was a bad decision that they clearly did because they were thinking this or wanted this or wanted that, when I don't know. And I think that just comes from just, being a reporter all my life, is that, the fewer assumptions you can make, the better off you are, and the more accurate what you're doing is going to be.
Yeah, well, and reading your book really gave me a whole new perspective. I mean, I have a much greater respect and appreciation and affection for them, having read your book and just
seeing that's interesting. Huh.
all the pressures they were under, and all the sort of long shots that they took, and all the things that went wrong with the weather and finance and studio pressure and all this kind of stuff that because I would watch my big complaint with the show was that I felt like there were all these amazing scenes in the book that either got cut out or were done in a really perfunctory way. And then there was all this screen time devoted to what I would consider just filler, where there's just like two random characters talking about nothing particularly important. And so your book really gave me a lot more appreciation for why those kinds of decisions were made.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I was trying to do throughout the book is you might like something, you might not like something, but here's why, why certain decisions were made, and why, people, did what they did, and what the thinking was behind it, and that's no more true than anything than with, not to jump ahead, but the final season, just because that's so divisive. And I spent like 6 chapters touching on it, to one aspect or another, and the idea was to try and put you there, and so you understand why decisions were made, and you have a feel for what it was like to go through it. And my thought is that I was trying to write it so that it can all either play out like the movie, like watching the movie Titanic, or like watching the movie Rudy, depending on your point of view about the final season. So, as you go through it, this is either a triumph or it's a disaster. But I was very trying much, not to kind of put a thumb on the scale and let the reader decide, how they felt about everything as it went along.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, as I said, I haven't actually watched the end of the show, but just sort of the narrative that got filtered down to me, even trying to avoid spoilers, was like, oh, Danny turns evil for no reason and destroys King's Landing, and it's like, makes no sense, and everybody hates it. And so then reading your book, I was kind of like, oh, actually, the way you explain it, and the way you just tell the story, and all the people involved in the show explain it, I was like, this actually sounds really cool. It made me actually want to go and watch it. So this is why I say, like, it actually might be good for at least a certain kind of person to read your book, to get the story from your book.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, in some ways, the way you're experiencing it, reading the book first and then potentially watching the show, is sort of the way I experienced it, because I was on set and I was told what happened. I found out what happened. And I was also asking them questions and finding out the reasons for everything being done. So I first heard, what happened and the logic for it, and then saw the result more than a year later. So it's like it already was kind of clear and made sense in my head. And then people had the reactions they did. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Did what they said that made sense to me conceptually not, play dramatically, or at least not play dramatically for clearly at least a percentage of the audience. So I'll be curious to hear what you think when you watch it, if it connects as well as it does intellectually in terms of what the plan was.
Yeah, but so you're in the camp that it when you actually watched the show, it worked for you dramatically?
I stay out of the camps.
Okay.
I stay out of the camps, and that isn't a dodge. It's more just, I think the average fan has a much clearer sense of how it played than I do, because they watched it correctly. They watched it, relaxed and enjoying it and not knowing what was going to happen. I came into it again, having known everything, and I'm also have my laptop open in front of me. I didn't see the episodes in advance. I'm frantically taking notes for my recap and preparing to post my postmortems. So the way I watch it was all screwed up because I was in the middle of working through it. So it's like really hard for me to be like, to put on a TV critic hat. And thankfully that's not my role anyway. If there's a battle over, whether the final season worked or not, and there's people warring over it, I'm more off to the side taking notes and reporting on what's going on. I'm trying to stay out of the sword swinging by myself and just kind of let people decide on their own what they think.
So what was the process of getting this book published? Like, did you know that there would be a demand for it, or like how did you go about approaching publishers or whatever?
A literary agent approached me during the final season while it was airing. And at that time, I was ready to be done. I was like, I'm so sick of writing about Game of Thrones, man. I can't do any more Game of Thrones stories.
This agent is someone you had not talked to?
No, it was a total cold call.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, how am I even going to take this call? I'm not even, I'm really busy. I got, Game of Thrones stuff to write. And he proposed the idea of doing it as an oral history. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, because that was like the one way that I always kind of thought if I were to ever do something that's the format I would do it in. And then I started thinking about, I've been covering the show for 10 years, and there's all these stories I've done, hundreds of stories, and they're all very piecemeal, all very specific. It's about a scene, it's about an actor, it's about a season preview. There's nothing that's been, that connected the whole thing, that told the whole thing. And plus, I increased my amount of Game of Thrones coverage every season. And I spent more, and I was allowed to spend more and more time on the sets as the seasons went on, because EW would invest more in terms of, sending me over there. So my early season coverage was really slim compared to what it became later. So there was an opportunity there to things like, what were those early meetings like? What was it like when the showrunners met George, and then they pitched it to the network, and then they did this pilot at the network, and then they're doing the first season that was all chaotic. And what was it like trying to pull off the first battle? Plus, there's all these controversies along the way that I would ask about at the time, and nobody wanted to talk about on the record. Like, the whole Dorne arc, for instance, was one thing or like Lady Stoneheart and that sort of thing. So I knew there was an opportunity to circle back on some of the controversies and see if people would open up more now that the show was over. And they did. So, my big guiding goal with this was basically just to write a book that was entertaining, that people liked, that really gave people a sense of what it was like on the show. I didn't want it to be like a production encyclopedia. A lot of making of stuff is very technical in terms of the presentation. I wanted to focus, there's thousands of people who worked on Thrones, and I decided to focus mainly on writers and actors and directors. So the writing, the performances, and the staging of the scenes. And, even that ended up taking the book from under 300 pages, like it was originally assigned, to 450 pages. So the whole thing just blew up to, end up being like 50% longer than it was originally planned for.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing I was I agree. It's really a page turner. It's a dramatic story just in its own right. And the thing that sort of drew me to it is I was just curious mostly about what George R. R. Martin, what insights he would have about the story, and, what his reaction to the show was and everything like that. And so there were some things, I hadn't even heard that really jumped out at me. I mean, like this thing about a fan trying to cut off his hair. That was just crazy.
Yeah. It's been fun since the book was published, and watching the media coverage as different things keep being found, and people are like, "Oh, hey, what about this?" I was wondering when somebody would zero in on that, and that's like one of those things where I've been like waiting for a headline to pop up somewhere about the time like an obsessed fan tried to cut off George R. R. Martin's hair. There's the backbone of oral history are the quotes. I'm very happy with the quotes that are in there. And that was the other thing, is that I really wanted to get largely new material, because so much has been written about Thrones by me and a lot of other great reporters at other publications. And I just really wanted to try and get as much new as possible, but at the same time, to dip into my archive of previously published quotes when necessary, because obviously I had covered many of the main things along the way that you don't want to leave out, like the Red Wedding or whatnot. So yeah. And in terms of George, I think he was my favorite interview for the book. We talked for like hours at his favorite restaurant in Santa Fe, and he was really candid. He was like, when you read his quotes, you're never quite sure which direction he's going to go on something, because there are things that he really praises about the show, and there's things that he's very critical about the show. And the journey for him in this is very emotionally complex, and he's pretty open about that. You can sort of feel that complexity as he goes on. So I was of all the things in the book, I was most happy with the interview that I had with George.
Also, the thing I didn't realize is he says that, one of his favorite things to do has always been to just spend all day at the bookstore, just browsing through all the books, and that he can't do that anymore because the show has made him so recognizable that a crowd gathers around him if he goes to the bookstore.
Yeah, and I don't know if I put the entirety of that in there, but I think I actually cut out the rest of it, where he talks about how, if he asks, they will keep the bookstore open for him, or open it early, or keep it open after closing. But then he's walking around, and like the employees are kind of there, and it's him, and it's kind of awkward. And they're like, if it's after closing, they're like, they have to wait for him to go home, and he feels bad. So, there's like no non-awkward way to do it. Interestingly, he now has a bookstore in Santa Fe. So I that's sort of time enough at last, with the Twilight Zone, ending. He has his own place now.
Well, see, my idea for him, if George, if you're listening, is what you should do is like shave your head and shave off your beard and just get super, super buff. And then like no one would recognize him. And then also, then people couldn't cut his hair off. Right. So it'd kind of be kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah. I've recently become conscious of how many people who are popular creatives that have signature looks, like men who have signature looks. And I think it was, interviewing Dave Filoni from Star Wars, Mandalorian. He always has something with a wolf on it, and he made me think. He reminded me a little bit of Robert Rodriguez, who always kind of has his own signature look. And then I thought of George R.R. Martin. I'm like, man, am I really boring? I don't have like a signature look. Is there something that I should try and cultivate to make myself more interesting? But George has a very distinctive look, and that can be rough for him sometimes, because whenever he's out, he gets noticed immediately.
Yeah. So what has been the experience with the book coming out? Are you getting reviews and stuff, and how are people becoming more sympathetic to the showrunners after reading your book?
So far, I've been surprised how few reviews there have been, because I think what the tactic most publications are taking is they get this book and they're like, let's find stuff in here to do a story on it instead of reviewing it. And as a person who works for EW, that's probably what I would do too. I'd probably read through it, find something that would make a good headline, and I'd probably do a story on that. So, but the reactions I've been hearing have been really positive, and I love hearing things like, "Oh, I finished it in 2 days." Even one person who complained about something, they complained about something midday Tuesday. And it was something, and I realized, I'm like, wait, what you're complaining about is something from chapter 16. That means you read 16 chapters in an afternoon. So, so that, you must be, really liking it then. One review said that was like really positive, but they noted, the book wasn't very interested in the controversies. I'm like, I'm totally interested in the controversies. I spend an entire chapter on Sansa Stark's wedding night, and 6 on the final season. I've always been hugely interested in all the controversies. I think one thing that I was worried about that doesn't seem to be the case so far in terms of the reaction. But maybe some reviews will prove that wrong. Is I was worried people. I feel like there's a certain percentage of people that have kind of their knives out for Thrones since it ended, and I was concerned that some would feel like if they read the reaction of the writers to something, and then they're just like, oh well, this book is terrible because I don't like what this person said about this or that. In other words, it's sort of a shoot the messenger thing, which is a risk you sort of take with oral histories. Because for me, as a reporter on it, it's my goal is to get people to open up and talk about the show, and open up and talk about these sensitive things that happened along the way, and the various controversies. And to me, getting that reaction and getting that quote and getting that explanation, that's the goal. And then I just put it there, and I'm not about to jump in and tell the reader how they should feel about it, or well, here's what I think about what this person just said. That's not the format. And I want everyone. There's a little great line there from Maisie Williams, who said this when she was like 16, 17, and it's basically something like, I think everyone has the right to be upset by whatever they're upset by. And I think that's spot on. And, I would never want to tell somebody that they should be upset or shouldn't be upset, for that matter, about whatever they read.
Well, I mean, in terms of the controversies, one line that jumped out at me is there's this HBO executive who says something like, Dave and Dan are not the kind of people who'd ever put anything in just to titillate the audience. Mm-hmm. And that seems just completely untrue. I mean, from my point of view, I mean, like, it just even boggles my mind that someone would, I mean, it just seems like there's like so much stuff in there that's only there to titillate the audience, but I don't know what your impression of that was.
It seems like in the early seasons in particular, that there is this awareness that they're on HBO, and the format of premium cable networks in 2011, 2012 is we have to give the audience what they're not getting on pay cable and what they're not getting on broadcast, which means sex, violence, and nudity, right? And so I do think that there's a certain amount of incentive there to sort of fulfill that mandate of giving people something that they could only get by subscribing. I also got the sense that as the show went on in the later seasons, that things like the famous sex position, the brothel scenes and so forth, where you have nudity going on while you're receiving exposition, and at the same time, where it just seems like it's kind of there for no reason other than to kind of spice up a scene, that really tended to fade away and not be there in the later seasons.
Well, yeah, I'll have to, if I watch the later seasons, I'll have to see that. It doesn't seem like it had faded away in the part I watched, but going back to this idea that of the showrunners not having, of having all sorts of limitations that they had to work around. I mean, at one point, I think they gave an interview where they said, oh, maybe for some of the big battles at the end of the show, we'll make them feature films, and then we can have a much bigger budget and everything. And that idea was shot down by HBO within like half an hour or something. Yeah,
that was a really intense experience, because I was on the set for season 3, and we had a conversation with the showrunners in one of the little bare bones trailer caravans that they had on set. And I'll never forget it. We're sitting at one of those little cramped little Formica tables, and the wind is blowing outside, and they start talking about how they're going to end the show with 3 movies. And as a reporter, my brain is exploding and trying to keep a straight face, like, oh really? And then they started talking about their plans for it and why they want to do it and why they felt it made sense. And it did make sense on some level, because they were on a show that there was no way it could pull off what George had told them at their summit meeting about what he was planning for the end of the books, that there was just no way that they could do it. So they were looking at this as, well, how do we do that on our budget? We can't do anything anywhere close to that. The only way we could do it is in movies. So maybe the final season can basically be 3 movies instead. And then I was like very eager to post that soon, because I had no idea where that was in the process, and I didn't know when it might come out someplace else. And so I called HBO for comment, and they had a big reaction, and then there was a whole summit meeting between HBO and the showrunners about it, and because HBO did not want to do that, because they're not in the business of doing movies. They're not in the business of saying, okay, now that you've watched a show on our network for 7 years, go to a movie theater to see how it ends. But HBO shooting that down, one of the most fascinating things about Thrones, and you talk about the hurdles that people who made it, had to overcome, is there's a quote in there from Harry Lloyd, who played Viserys Targaryen, that Game of Thrones had to become the biggest show in the world in order for them to make it. And that's right, because they sold it on the idea of this is going to be a small, more intimate show, knowing that they had all these massive battles that they had to do, even in just the books that were published, let alone the ones they'd learn about later in the books that haven't been published. So the only way that they could make the show was to make it more popular every season, and to make it become such a phenomenon, and make it become so successful that HBO would have to give them the money that they would need to do the next thing that they wanted to do. So it was such an incredible feat for them to pull that off, and kind of a really ballsy thing to do. You're really just kind of on a total high wire act trying to do that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a shame that HBO shot down the movie theater idea, because there was this thing I saw one time where they released 2 of the episodes in IMAX.
Yes.
And went and saw it in New York on IMAX. And so
it's fantastic.
Yeah. And so it was one of them was the Battle at the Wall.
Yep.
And I had watched that on my laptop, and I was like, this is pretty good, but it was like seeing it on IMAX, I was just like blown away. Like, this is amazing,
Yeah.
So it's just a completely different experience.
Yeah, and I got to go to a couple of the premieres, which all were also on big screens, and I think that was actually something that was influential to them, because whenever they had seen it, what they did in a theater for the premieres they would have, I mean, most TV shows wouldn't fill a movie screen and have it feel like a movie, but theirs did. When you see it on the big screen, you see all this detail in the costumes and the sets that you would never even notice. Even on like a really great TV, you would never even notice. So Game of Thrones was kind of made for a level of presentation that people watching it at home weren't getting. And this is one of those things that's happening during this tour, talking about the book, where every once in a while I'll start talking about something, I'm like, damn it, I should have put that in the book. Because it's very true that it was made in some ways made for the big screen. Arguably, what they did in the final season was basically like 3 movies, and that was also part of what people didn't like about it, because the show had a very TV-like pace for the first 6 seasons, and then seemed to speed up a bit in season 7 and with season 8. And when the pace changed, it started to feel like a bit different and a bit like a different thing. And for a lot of fans, I feel like they felt like, no, I don't like this. I like the way it was before. And when you would see scene after scene of a journey from A to B, not just have somebody, they're here, and then 20 minutes later they're already at the other place. And I think that was part of the frustration with those final 2 seasons.
But you think if it had gone to movie theaters, that change of pace would have not been so jarring to people, or would have seemed more natural?
I think it would have more seemed like what you were seeing. I mean, here's the thing. I think one thing that might have made a difference, and this is just a pet theory and could be totally stupid and wrong, but in the final season, there were 3 episodes or 4 episodes that were 80 minutes long. So you had these supersized episodes, and each one of them pretty much has or actually three of them rather have a very distinctive. Three of the 4 have a very distinctive break in the middle, where it's like the first half feels like one thing, and the second half feels like a bit like a different thing. I always wondered if those 3 episodes had aired over 6 weeks instead of 3 weeks, whether they would have been received a little differently. Because you would have had more time to process what happened in the first half, and then you'd have more time to look forward to what happened in the second half. And so that, to whatever degree there was a certain amount of speeding up in terms of the storytelling, would not have been noticed as much if they had been stretched out over more weeks, even if it had been the exact same amount of content. But, again, that could be totally wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so I was telling you that about how I was trying to avoid spoilers, and it was just totally hopeless. No matter what I did, they would be like, "Oh, John came back to life," would be in like a YouTube ad. I mean, it was just like it was everywhere, Yeah. And so almost everything was spoiled, I felt like. And then like there are a couple things in your book where I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." But then actually I went back and listened to our previous discussions, and it's kind of like, oh, there's actually, even having read your book, there's still like so many questions that I still don't know the answer to. So I'm just going to run some of these by you. You can don't tell me the answers, but tell me if any of these are answered in the show, but that just didn't make it into your book. So like, who is Cold Hands / what happened to Benjen Stark? What's up with the horns to bring down the wall and control the dragons? Who is the prince that was promised, and who is Azor Ahai Reborn? And what happened to Patchface when he drowned? I take it none of that is in the show.
I don't. Well, I mean, Benjen Stark. There's a bit of a button on that, but not entirely. But there's some of that, but not perhaps as much as book readers would probably want.
How about the prince who was promised? Because you have this like Dan and Dave played a prank on you. You said.
Yeah. They, I asked them, who was the prince who was promised, and they said, you need to go ask Kit. And they're like, yeah, you need to go ask Kit. He's, we told Kit, he knows. So I'm like, okay, Kit has the answer. Okay. And then months later, interviewing Kit Harington, he's just like, basically, what the hell are you talking about? He's like, they never told me that. They never told me shit. They're just putting you off on me. So,
this was before the show ended or after the show ended?
That was after the show ended. And
so it's not in the show. It doesn't get answered, I guess.
No, it does not. You can, I think it's one of those things that they're just letting fans like answer on their own.
Uh-huh. I mean, one of the quotes I really liked is when you're talking to George R. R. Martin, and actually you ask everyone sort of, what do you think the legacy of Game of Thrones is going to be? Mm-hmm. And he says that he hopes Game of Thrones will make fantasy just normal, adult fantasy normal on television.
Right.
I was just curious, as a professional entertainment reporter, what do you think the prospects for that are?
I think the prospects of that are excellent. I mean, especially now that you have The Witcher blowing up on Netflix. I mean, if there's any doubt before, now that you have that, I think the chances of that are very good.
Are there? It's hard for me to think of a lot of other epic fantasy kind of things on TV. I mean, there's the Wheel of Time show coming out. There's
Wheel of Time, and of course,
there's the Lord of the Rings show.
Amazon's doing Lord of the Rings for $500 million, so it's been reported. And of course, there's Throne's own prequel, House of the Dragon, which definitely sounds. George is very excited about that. He's very bullish on that, and Miguel Sapochnik, one of the showrunners of House of the Dragon, is one of Throne's best directors, and he did well. Someday you're going to see the Battle of the Bastards, and you will be impressed. Let me put it that way. I at least I think you will be.
So, are you bullish on it?
I'm more bullish on this than I was about the other prequel. The other one, I was like, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure, because it sounded like kind of similar in not the right ways, and that more about the White Walkers and Another Long Night. And it's like, I don't know if that's and thousands of years before the events in Game of Thrones. You really want to go that far back? So I wasn't really that big on that idea, but House of the Dragon sounds cool. I mean, Targaryen Civil War and 300 years before sounds like it's going to be different, but not so different that it'll be unrecognizable. I think it's definitely got a shot.
They filmed a pilot for the other one, but it didn't go to series. Is that right?
Yeah. People always ask me, well, don't you want to see the unaired pilot that from Game of Thrones? It's like, no, I want to see the unaired pilot for the other thing because the Jane Goldman pilot starring Naomi Watts. That thing's a total black box. I mean, nobody's talking about that. So it filmed an entire pilot and then they scrapped it. And really, part of that just goes to show how tough this is to do, right? It's like, even with having already done Game of Thrones and already done one show and seemingly kind of figured it out, if you try and restart and recast and recapture that magic, there's a lot of ways that can go wrong.
Yeah. So say for the sake of argument, I don't have time to watch 4 more seasons of Game of Thrones, and I just have time to watch like 5 episodes or something. Which ones should I go ahead and watch?
I would definitely watch The Battle of the Bastards and The Winds of Winter, which are 2 Miguel Sapochnik directed episodes that end season 6. And I think those, there's a fair number of people that rank those as 2 of the best episodes of the show. I mean, they're really spectacular, and yet in different ways. I think they really capture the intimate and the epic pretty well. So, I mean, those would be the, I wouldn't throw 5 at you. I would say, do those 2 and then see if you still don't want to watch the rest of it.
All right, cool. Yeah, I can definitely do 2. I guess just one maybe final thing I wanted to ask you is you live in Austin, and my girlfriend and I just moved to Austin recently.
Oh, cool.
I was just curious, is there any stuff, once the COVID is over, hopefully, is there stuff in Austin for fantasy and science fiction fans and commentators and stuff that I should check out? There's a game shop on South Lamar that has a open game night on Tuesdays where it's all board games, and I do like that. And there is a comic book store on let's see, is it North Lamar or is it Burnett? I think it's on Burnett that my friend who is a huge comic book fan absolutely loves, that I can get you the name of afterward. One of my favorite things in Austin is, as an entertainment fan, is Master Pancake Theater, which is basically like Mystery Science Theater 3000, but live. And every weekend at the Alamo Draft House in downtown, they won't pick like old B movies. They do like modern classics. They riff like Back to the Future and Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 and 50 Shades of Grey and that sort of thing. Their riffs are really fun comic events. But of course, they're on hiatus right now. But hopefully, we'll be back soon. Yeah. I mean, how do you find it being an entertainment reporter based in Austin compared to New York or LA? Or is there what are the pros and cons or whatever?
I mean, the cons are there's a value to being able to go do business lunches in LA with people in the industry. So that's a con. The advantages are just about everything else. I mean, it's most people, when I moved here about, I guess like 7 years ago, I went to University of Texas at Austin, then moved away and then came back. so when I moved back here, I was really worried because I was like, is this going to work? Am I going to be able to, get as many scoops? I mean, I'm going to be able to be as productive and everything else. And to my surprise, it worked out great. I mean, everybody, in LA likes Austin, so they don't. I was worried, like, will people that I'm trying to get on the phone still return my calls if I'm in Austin? And the answer is yes, they will. So and also everyone in LA eventually seems to come here anyway. I mean, it's like whether it's South by Southwest or ACL or ATX Television Festival or Moonlight Tower, or Moon Tower Comedy Festival rather. It seems like everybody that I want to connect with in LA comes to Austin at some point in the year. So it all ends up kind of working out.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. I'll definitely check out those things, the comic book store and everything. So we're pretty much out of time. So I guess, do you have just any final thoughts or any other projects you want to let people know about?
Let's see. No other projects. I hope if people check out the book that they like it, and if they have any thoughts about it, they're welcome to ping me on Twitter. I'm at James Hibbard, and also be posting some outtakes from the book on EW.com in the coming months. So there's a lot of things that were just like near misses for inclusion, so that I'll be rolling out some of those in the months to come.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's a terrific book, really fun and exciting to read, even if you haven't seen the show, as I can testify from personal experience. And again, the book, it's called Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon by James Hibbard. So James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to James Hibbard for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.